Mike's got kind of a unique, must have hold this up, I think, right? Mike's got a unique side of things to share with us tonight. I think you're really going to enjoy this.
I noticed this morning Batavia used to have a water tower. One of the differences. Hey, Pata! ¿Cómo está? You don't remember Pagliacci? What's the matter for you? That was 50 years ago and 40 pounds ago. And back then, I needed makeup to look old. But I'd like to reflect back not 50, but 60 years with you. What it was like growing up in Batavia, New York, community of opportunity. Remember that? Life was simpler in the 40s and early 50s, but in some ways it was really more complex. Most of us went to grammar schools in Batavia. In my case, I went to Pringle, a bunch of my classmates here. And we were oriented, no matter which school we went to our neighborhoods. There were loads of kids that lived within 2 or 3 blocks of us. And you know what? We played outside. Year-round. We played outside. Amazing. Snow was a raw material for having even more fun. In my neighborhood, the most popular park wasn't a park at all. It was a vacant lot in the middle of the block that we called the jungle. And it was the site of countless ball games. If it rained, we had a solution. We played west. or sometimes we'd go into the garage and draw a circle in the dirt floor and play marbles under the roof. Making stilts, walking on cans, building wooden carts, hide-and-go-seek, Red Rover, Mother May I, cowboys and Indians, jumping off the roof of a neighbor's garage, sitting on Tony Kalani's steps making up stories, snowball fights, wooden sword fights, fishing in Tonawanda Creek, monthly pegs, scouts, 9-cent Saturday movie marathons at the Lafayette Theater, clustering around an early TV set, waiting for Howdy Doody time. After impatiently tolerating the test pattern and Kate Smith. The time finally came when you heard, when the moon comes over the mountain, and you knew it was then time. It's Howdy Doody time. It's Howdy Doody time. There was no shortage of things to do. We went home for supper and hightailed it there if we heard our moms call. Somehow, think about it, we all lived through it with smiles on our dirty faces. The milkman delivered in a horse-drawn wagon, and the glass bottles that he left on the porch had a simple, round, flat cover wedged into them. If I saw the milk on the porch, it was my job to get it upstairs to the fridge before it either froze or soured, depending on the time of year. And when I did that, I would often peel back that little lid and take a sip of the cream on top of the milk bottle before I put it back on and slipped it in the liquid. The neighborhoods that we lived in had a steady parade of vendors. The pop man, the Stella bleach man, the live chicken guy, the bread man, the ice man, the junk man, the produce vendors. Remember how they used to cut plugs in the watermelon until it was ripe? The rag man who announced his arrival. Rags! No shortage of offerings. If you needed something else, you could always run to Scafetta's. Where's Richard? There's my buddy. You could run to Scafetta's or Pelletteri's or Rubino's or Joya's or the plentiful and friendly local corner stores in every one of our neighborhoods. While we may not have understood Cold War, we were worried about atomic bombs. We were cautioned not to eat icicles because they might be the cause of polio. World War II was recent enough for us to remember relatives who came back home and some who didn't. We can recall blackout rooms and radio updates on the status of the war. There were, of course, other things that we preferred hearing on the radio. Saturday morning, Uncle Ed. Pluck your magic twang your frog. All right. I wasn't listening the day at the end of the show when Uncle Ed, who was broadcasting that show live back then, thinking the mic was dead, said over the air, "That ought to keep the little bastards for another week."
Frank, 5 seconds.
See, I said that and he had to take my picture. For those of us living on the south side of Batavia, the wrong side of the tracks, guys. That's at least until the New York Central moved the tracks outside. Life was really quite unusual for those of us who lived in that part of the town. The south side of Batavia was the center of life for a variety of ethnic groups who brought their cultures to the American melting pot. It really was very interesting. And it was not until many years later that I realized that our particular neighborhood was much more like a Sicilian village than an American town. Becky and I, in 2001, took a walking tour of Sicily. And I walked through the graveyard in the town of Valedone, which is in Sicily. And it's where my grandparents originated. Walking through that graveyard and reading the stones was like looking at the phone book in the Batavia directory. The Batavia Telephone. It was really fascinating. My grandmother, Nana, arrived around the turn of the century with 2 children, my Uncle Pete and my Aunt Rosie. My dad was born here. Nana died in 1957, 94 I think she was, never speaking English. She didn't have to in that neighborhood. I always felt sorry for those in the neighborhood, including, by the way, my own mother, who had no Italian heritage whatsoever, who spoke no Italian, and who often, therefore, felt or presumed that she was the topic of a conversation that she couldn't understand around her. In those early days, in the south end of Batavia, Roman Catholic Church holidays were marked by processions through the street with statues of the honored saint being carried in advance of the church band. The band would stop quite often to partake of some good homemade wine. Nego Red. Great stuff. Each festival brought with it traditional foods. The wheat porridge on St. Lucy's and the donut-shaped bread loaves for St. Nicholas feast that we chewed on and carried along dangling from the handlebars of our bicycles. Our bicycles decorated with crepe paper in the spokes. Some of us attended special feasts. I think it was St. Joseph's Day, where they had a special feast for virgins. And you know what? In those days, young virgins of both genders were a hell of a lot more common than they seem now. Old folks gathered near the corner of what was then Taggart Street and Thorpe Street to talk or play bocce or other games, much as it's still done in villages in Italy today. Cinque! Savior! Those of you who can remember that. In our neighborhood, and in many of yours, events took place that seemed very natural back then, didn't they? Yeah. That we look back on 50 or 60 years later and realize just how unique those years were for all of us. In the summer of 1953, most of us were excited and probably a little scared about the prospect of moving on to Batavia Junior Senior High School. We were leaving our closely knit neighborhoods, the unique subcultures that had nourished us and moved us along. This was the critical point where we, like the milk from the local dairy that used to have cream floating on top, started to become a much. 7th grade started, and those of us from all over town, and some from out of town as well, moved on to Ross Street, met and began to interact together. Listen fast. In classes, choristers, band, orchestra, future teachers, intramural sports, thespians, world affairs, glee club, cross-country, baseball, football, basketball, science club, rocket society, cricket staff, dances, proms, cheerleading, student government, choral club, palliatis, modernettes, sports events, rallies, golf team, league club, ski club, track, Batavian staff, GAA, service league, library club, stage group, school play, nurses club, dean's workers, class trip, honor society, Christmas caroling, etc., etc. And you know what? Some of us even joined together to go across the street to smoke. My wife said, those were the bad kids, weren't they? Whatever it was that brought us together, we came to know and love one another. Sabatino and Sandberg and Jasek and Jacket and Smith and D'Angelo and Gannon and Wozniak and Claflin and Johnson and Norris and Polito and Lampkin and Mumford and Rogers and Young. And I'd love to be able to read the whole list. Our 6 years at Batavia High and all that we did during them created and strengthened relationships and alliances, some of which have endured ever since. Others that remain stronger in our memories, probably, than in today's reality. So here we are, 50 years after the convoy in which we were traveling along life's highway changed so dramatically when we all moved on from Batavia High in 1959. This evening, we're enjoying a wonderful opportunity for each of us to reflect on what it all meant and to renew acquaintances. For me, and I suspect for many of you, it took years for the full appreciation of what we had back then to develop. But develop and grow, it did. And for it, I am truly grateful. As we look back, and as we look ahead, let's all remember, occasionally before we slip it into the fridge, to take a little sip of cream from the top of life's bottle. Arrivederci.